From WHIV in New Orleans, this is P Flag New Orleans, expanding the rainbow. And I'm your host, Sally Michelle Jackson, along with
Good morning, everyone. Tara the Purple Butterfly.
Josh, aka Adonis, is in the process of moving. So we don't know when we'll see him again. You know how moving goes. But WHIV is radio program dedicated to human rights and social justice. Check us out online at WHIVFM.org and be sure to like us on Facebook. End all wars. This is our opportunity to reach out to the LGBTQ plus community and beyond with information that's pertinent to the LGBTQ plus community and its allies. This program adheres to PFLAG's mission. Today's program, as always, is brought to you by the letters P, F, L, A, and G, and the number 2, because it takes at least 2 people to have a conversation. And our guest today is Ezra Salter. Is that the correct pronunciation?
Yes.
Oh, good. And they are here to talk about a very important program for us. So we're going to let them explain it to you. Ezra, would you like to?
Yeah.
Okay.
So my name is Ezra. I'm a funeral director and embalmer here in New Orleans. And I'm also on the board of WHIV, which is a death care nonprofit. So our work covers a wide variety of topics. With WHIV, we do a lot of advocacy and helping families with affordable access to burial and cremation. I mean, we go as far as driving people around, calling funeral homes for them, some helping with funding, things like that. We offer death cafes. We do clinics, different clinics to get paperwork done. And we just released our Louisiana LGBTQ plus end of life planning guide. So that's something that we've been working on for about a year. It's a guide that's available for free online. And it covers everything from hospice care and medical care to estate planning to funeral planning. And it answers a lot of questions that would be relevant to pretty much anybody, but there is a lot of focus on issues that come up specifically with the LGBTQ plus community. So things about name changes, what to do if you're unmarried or estranged from your family, gender marker. It answers a lot of questions that the answers to those questions were not easily accessible until now. So that's our big project right now. And we just released it a couple of weeks ago. We're super excited about it. And now we're going to be offering some clinics where people can, get a living will done, give their right of disposition, and ask any questions that they have about this sort of stuff. Because I know it can be very esoteric for people, for sure.
Okay. Yeah, we ran across this particular program at a Sage coffee talk. And Sage originally was called No Age, which was New Orleans Advocates for, well, anyway, it's for the elderly LGBTQ community because there's nobody really doing things to make sure you know what's going on. And it's a time of life when maybe we're not as sharp as we used to be, and we might need a little more help finding what we need as opposed to just, oh, well, I'll just go online and hunt through all this stuff because there is a ton of conflicting information all over everywhere on any subject. But when you get into like, how do you make sure you get buried? Like as a trans woman, I don't want my old name showing up. And I made a joke about, well, don't put the dead name on it because they're dead now. It matches, and that's not what we want, And there are ways that you can legally make sure that you're buried under the right name.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot of things you can do. I mean, a lot of it hinges on, did you get your name legally changed? So once you legally change your name with the government, with the Louisiana government, you want to make sure that you follow through with that name change. So you're going to want to notify Social Security, your banks, any insurance policies that you might have, pretty much anything of importance that somebody may have to do for your estate when you pass. You're going to want to make sure that that information is updated and correct. And then as far as making sure that you're memorialized under the correct name, a lot of that has to do with putting somebody in charge of your final affairs who you can trust. So we experience a lot of issues where people are either estranged from their family, or they know for a fact that their family is not going to give them that dignity in death. And so the pre-planning aspect of that is, choosing somebody that you're close to who you can trust to carry out your final wishes, putting all the paperwork in place, and then also making sure that they have the funding to carry out those wishes. So a great example would be like putting your name on a headstone. Your name can be whatever you want on a headstone, even if you didn't legally change it. I mean, people put nicknames and, shortened names on headstones all the time. But the person who's paying for that inscription is going to be the one who gets to make that decision. So you have the option to, if you already have property, do that inscription ahead of time. You have the option to put somebody in charge of your final wishes who has been given access to funds to complete that inscription. But it does take planning, and it's one of those things where when somebody passes, if they didn't already make those arrangements, it can be really overwhelming for the people who are left to grieve them, trying to make sure that they're honored in the way that they would hope.
Well, that's something that's become more prevalent now, I believe, in the people doing prepaid, prearranged funerals for themselves, so nobody has to deal with it. My sister has done that now, but it wasn't because she thought this would be nice to do and everybody will have it easier. It was after she was the one in the same city, or at least the same state, with my parents when they died about a year apart. And she was responsible for doing all that stuff. And she realized this is not fun to do while you're already dealing with, well, it's particularly when my father died, because she still had to take care of my mother while doing all this other stuff. And it got to be just like overwhelming for her. And then she had to do it again. I forget, maybe 2 years difference, but anyway, she had to do it again for my mother. And she just said, well, while I'm dealing with these people anyway, she had a plot for her husband and for her. Actually, her husband died in between the other two. He had Alzheimer's and he passed away from complications with that. And so she had arranged 3 funerals. And she said, I'm just going to make it a 4th right now while I'm talking to these people. So hers is completely done, so everything's taken care of, a whole lot easier. But it's not something that people like to think about, because we all like to think,
absolutely.
well, that's a long way away. Well, no, it's not always a long way away. Things happen to young people too. I mean, everybody doesn't die of natural causes.
Yeah.
There are car accidents. There's all kinds of stuff going on. And if you haven't ever done anything about it, you leave it for everybody that's left behind.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we say, it's never too late until it's too late.
Okay.
And yeah, I mean, that's kind of where the inspiration for this guide came from, is so I'm non-binary, my wife is a trans woman. And when we started dating, we had very hostile reactions from our family. And it became pretty clear to me that if one of us were to pass before we were married, that we could not trust our family to honor us in death the way that we wanted. That neither of us, we would be at the mercy of the other person's parents. And so that's kind of where all these questions came from. And so as I started my journey in funeral service and, getting licensed, I was asking all of these very specific questions to the professionals I encountered, because I was not finding the answers online. The resources weren't available. There were no compassionate answers. There were no clear answers for the LGBTQ plus community. And so, once I had been wanting to do this guide for a while. And then once I got together with Wake, it was something that I pitched, and Wake and Liz in particular were super instrumental in sort of like organizing myself and other, relevant professionals to kind of put this together as like a complete, beautiful resource out there. But it's definitely been, 5 years of me just asking anybody who is a professional in this field, like these very specific questions, and also some things that I picked up along the way in my own career. So you mentioned pre-arranging. Pre-arranging is a great option if you know that you're where you're going to be when you die, kind of, like if you are settled in a town like New Orleans, then you know that you're going to be here the rest of your life probably, and you plan on being buried here or cremated here. It's a really good option for people. It can save you money, but the catch is that in Louisiana, pre-arrangements are not protected. So if you don't put somebody in charge of your disposition that you can trust to carry out the wishes that you've pre-planned and prepaid for, whoever your legal next of kin is, if you haven't given that right to somebody else, they can totally change what you've done and like do what they will with that funding. And I've seen that happen before, and it was super unfortunate. And it was one of those things where the person who was passing didn't learn about the fact that they could give their right of disposition to a trusted friend until it was too late. And their next of kin came in and totally disregarded their choices, even though they had already prepaid for them and pre-authorized their own cremation. So that's sort of the one of the huge facts that we try and tell people with this guide, because when you deal with family estrangement or any sort of issues with the people who would be your blood relatives, we want people to know that there's a way around this. There's a way to protect yourself and to stop people who are actively going to try and dishonor you from being able to do so. But it can be, a huge deal for some people, because I think, a lot of people don't know who's going to be in charge of burying them, or think that like a friend can do it or something. And if you don't give people those legal rights, they don't actually, even if they want to step up and handle your disposition and care for you in death, they may not be legally allowed to do so.
And now this is separate from a power of attorney, as Liz told us at that meeting, that a power of attorney that you give to a friend, when you die, that's over. This is the disposition has to be a separate document and all, giving them that power, because the other ends. And that's what most people don't realize. I've got it taken care of. I've already got somebody that's in charge of that. Not once you die. They're through.
Yeah, correct. Absolutely. And I've had a lot of people be, very heartbroken and wound up in a lot of stress, because they assumed that, because they were handling medical choices or financial choices as somebody was sick, that they could just finish, caring for this person in death. And, to be like, I'm sorry, you're going to have to either wait 30 days or get a court order or find this long lost brother that nobody's ever spoken to, that people don't get along with. It leaves people with a lot of undesirable options, unfortunately. And people they do think that they have everything taken care of, because we don't really talk about death. And so that hospitals are really good about getting medical power of attorney and getting medical documents taken care of, but nobody tells you that like those don't count anymore when somebody passes, unfortunately.
Yeah. And that's a rather important thing to know. And I have to say, I like to put a comic spin on everything, because it helps people when they're talking about, deeply tragic things like what happens after you die, what these other people are going through. But when you're talking about this stuff, you have to remember that other people, we don't like to talk about death. It's just something we don't do. There are two subjects you can bring up that will suck the air out of a conversation immediately. So if you're at a party and you've gotten surrounded by a group of people you really don't want to talk to anymore, you can say, have you arranged for your funeral yet? And that'll probably lose a few of them. But the few that stick around and say, now, can we talk about Jesus? Because that does it too. So, but these are things that, they neither one should, but they both do. And so rather than doing that, we're going to bring up another subject that will clear a room. And that's when we remind everybody that they're listening to WHIV LP in New Orleans, 102.3 FM. WHIV is radio programming dedicated to human rights and social justice. Stream us live online at WHIVFM.org in all wars. There, another nice segue, right, Tyra?
Right on in.
Smooth.
Smooth operator Sally.
Now,
The queen of
um,
segways.
now we were talking about you. You mentioned that you're non-binary, married to a trans woman, and that's what got
Mhm.
you interested in finding out more about this. But the real reason that you are already thinking about this is what you do for a living, right?
Well, the questions about what's going to happen to us when we die came first.
Really?
And yeah, so she and I met in college, and I pursued funeral service after college. So that was something that I had kind of always been wondering. Because I unfortunately experienced like very severe negative reactions from my family. There was a lot of turmoil, and I wasn't expecting it. It was like the thing that you never think is going to happen to you, and then it does.
Yeah.
So I really was like, there were times where I was like legitimately concerned, if one of us were to get in a wreck or something, like it adds on so much heartache when you're already grieving somebody to then have to deal with people trying to like dishonor them as well. So, I mean, fortunately, we never had to deal with any of that, but those questions were definitely there first. And so then when I went into funeral service professionally, it was always in the back of my mind. It was always like, I need the answers to these questions because one day I'm going to have to give somebody else these answers and I want to know them.
Okay.
That's
And,
awesome.
yeah, that was we talked a little bit before the show about what they should expect as we went along here, and that was when we pointed out that Tyra had been uh, in that particular program herself before Katrina.
Yes.
Yeah. And that brought us to a discussion of how few places you can actually study to be in the funeral services and embalming and being a mortician and all of that. And the good news for everybody in this area is the only place in the state of Louisiana happens to be in New Orleans.
Yeah, it's a 2-year associate's degree. I'm pretty sure it's the only place left in the state to get certified. I mean, there's online programs that you can do, but it's a 2-year associate program. So a lot of people come into the program having already like done some amount of schooling or already have a degree, or you can do your like gen eds at Delgado, and then you have to apply and like do a whole thing to get in. It's 2 years, and then you leave with a dual license. So you would, after passing all your state boards and serving your internship, you would then become an embalmer and funeral director. However, Louisiana does also offer an undertaker's license, or what we call a U license. And so those are people who are just licensed funeral directors. They're not embalmers. And that actually doesn't require you to go through the program. So you do need, I think, like 30-ish hours of college credit. And then you have to serve an internship with a funeral home and take your state boards, but you don't have to actually like go to the funeral service program. So there's definitely options out there for people who are interested in it. And I know I mean, we were talking earlier about how much people commute to Delgado and how far people travel to go to this program. But there are like definitely jobs to be had in other parts of the state because New Orleans is such a saturated market now. It can be a great option for people, for sure.
Is it still at the City Park campus?
It was when I was there. I think that there was talks about moving it into the charity building downtown, but
Okay.
I'm not sure. I think it's still in City Park.
It was in City Park when I was there in 2003,
Hmm.
2004.
Yeah, it was still City Park when I went. And we're right by a Halt too, which is really interesting. So we would go walk through Halt Cemetery and discuss that as well.
A funny story about Holt. My
Yeah.
mom's second husband is in Holt Cemetery. I would leave class, he raised me for years. So I would
Hmm.
leave class, go sit at the cemetery with him, have lunch, talk, then go back to class between classes.
I love
So I
that.
love, yeah. Twice a week, I would go with my dad in the cemetery.
That's so sweet. I feel like Hulk gets a really bad rap because there's like a lot of like what I would describe as like folk art and like tributes in Hulk. Like there's a lot of flowers, a lot of like flags
Yeah.
and like lawn ornaments and stuff. And then unfortunately, the way that the city maintained Holt up until recently did it a huge disservice because they were sprayed so many pesticides that there's like not a lot of grass anymore. But I'm
Mhm.
really, really good friends with the superintendent of city cemeteries, Emily Ford, and she has just done a world of difference for Holt. I mean,
Yes.
land management, improving
Absolutely.
drainage. And I feel like people who don't understand Holt and the families who use Holt like overlook it. But Holt is so beautiful because it gets the most activity. Like she says that like the families who bury in Holt visit all the time. They're always there caring for their graves. Like they really
Mhm.
it's a place of such like strong community. And
Mhm.
yeah, Holt's super interesting. It's really, really interesting. I feel like you can learn a lot about the funeral culture in New Orleans just by visiting Holt for
Yeah.
sure.
Now
Mhm.
that is interesting to me because I didn't grow up in New Orleans. I grew up in Fort Worth, Texas, where cemeteries were places you went when you had to. Somebody made you go, you know, and it's different. And the first time I ran into anything about people visiting and having lunch with their deceased relatives was in Hawaii, and it was a Buddhist cemetery. And
Oh,
you'd look out across the grounds, and there would be dozens of families with picnics spread out, and they go to the point of having an extra plate sitting there, for the whoever they're sitting with. But
oh, that's really neat.
they honor their ancestors that way. And I saw that, and I thought, wait, that would never go in Fort Worth because people didn't want to be there in the first place, and then they'd go like, "Oh, this is too creepy for me." And I thought it's a much better way to prepare yourself for that time if you think that it's just a continuation of it. Their family doesn't go away; they're still with you. And it's just it
Hmm.
seemed like a really really better way of looking at it than we do. And the funny thing is
Yeah,
that,
definitely.
yeah, as a supposedly Christian, largely Christian group, why do we fear death so much when it's supposed to be better? you know,
Yeah,
you're supposed to go.
absolutely.
The afterlife is supposed to be what you were working to get to, and yet nobody wants to go. Seems odd.
I feel like New Orleans has such a strange relationship with our cemeteries and death acceptance because so much of our tourist culture and our tourist dollars go towards cemetery tours. And we tout ourselves as this like necropolis and come see the famous New Orleans cemeteries and the cities
Yeah.
of the dead and all this stuff. But yeah, people who live here are not like really, no pun intended, dying to talk about it, dying to talk about death. Yeah, I feel like there's definitely. I feel like sometimes the families who have property in these cemeteries are at odds with the tourism and also with the death culture. Like they don't want to acknowledge,
Yeah.
their death. I mean, there's a big push to get people to like start putting more effort into preserving their property.
Yeah.
I had mentioned to Emily before she was a preservationist. I mean, she still is, but she was a preservationist before she got hired by the city, and she helped the Lafayette Number One Tomb Owners organize. And there's we try and get people to like continue to maintain these tombs and continue to use them because it is like such a big part of our culture. And if you're lucky enough to have access to something like that in your family, I mean, that's so cool. And it's something that you can continue to use for generations.
Yeah.
Um, and also it's green. Like, I mean, green burial is a big thing now. And
Yeah.
we don't have any certified green cemeteries in Louisiana currently. But that is like the closest thing that you can get to green burial here. And it's so cool because if you make green choices, if you don't embalm, or if you get buried in a green casket that's going to biodegrade, and then you go into a traditional tomb and you decompose the way that you're supposed to, that tomb can then continue to be reused. And like that is extremely green. And it's so cool that we have access to that. But yeah, I feel like even people who have property don't really want to like talk about their mortal demise.
Yeah. Well, one of the
I
things
want to know what I want.
we don't want to know what you want.
Cremate me.
Okay.
Go to your favorite place that reminds you of me. Have a cup of coffee, and when you see a butterfly or something purple, think of me. That's it.
That's lovely.
Okay. I had a different one. When I was in Fort Worth, I was having a feud at the time with the director of the Fort Worth Symphony. It was a minor thing with nothing really bad, but kind of irritated with him. So I wanted a Viking funeral. I wanted a barge floating down the Trinity River with my casket and all burning, and I wanted it to be followed by a barge with the Fort Worth Symphony playing Siegfried's death and funeral procession. But I wanted it to be on fire too because I was irritated with the director. And somehow I couldn't get permits for any of this. So,
Yeah, unfortunately, Viking funerals are not legal in the United States.
I know.
There is one place in Colorado. It's a really small community. Caitlin Doty wrote about it in one of her books, where if you're a member of that community, they offer open air cremation. And it's for no charge. Like they don't charge you for it, but you have to be like a resident of this tiny community to participate. And it was like a lot of work for them to get this legalized. Like they had to consult all these people who lived on this mountain, and like everybody had to agree, and it was the whole thing. So that's about the closest you can get to a Viking funeral here.
Yeah. Well, that was of course a joke. I love the way they do funerals here, the traditional New Orleans funerals, because all of the mourning takes place on the way to the cemetery, and you get that out of the way because we're not supposed to be mourning their lives forever. We're supposed to get on with the others. And I love the idea of the second line and the celebration of their life. I think that's the best way to honor somebody that's gone, is to celebrate their having been here. And that's a beautiful tradition,
And that's why I say, your fondest place, if your fondest memory of me is at a coffee shop, go to the coffee shop, have a cup of coffee, and think of me. Think of the joy that we shared. If your fondest memory of me is in the kitchen cooking, go to the kitchen and cook and think of me in the kitchen preparing your favorite meal. And don't cry, don't be sad. Just remember that this butterfly will continue to fly and carry on.
Yep. And that's
so sweet.
Yeah. And that's a beautiful way to be remembered, with you having the butterflies, because it's like every spring people will be going, oh, there goes a butterfly. But you remember how Tyra used to, That's nice.
There's something purple, there's a butterfly, there's a cup of coffee, Tyra, somewhere.
Yeah, a large cup of coffee to do it.
Yeah.
But we're getting ready to have our halftime break. I always call it that because I've marched in bands for so many years. And we're coming up on football season again, so we're about to do our. Yeah, now Tyra doesn't get excited about football. She doesn't care about the Saints at all, right? Yeah. So, I always. I enjoy football more now than I did when I was in the marching bands, because I don't have to work in a football game now. I get to just sit there and enjoy it. I don't have to keep watching the director. Oh, we're playing again. But they're about. I wanted to see what's going on there. They don't mind interrupting you. And speaking of interrupting you, here we go. Okay, This is a reminder that you've been listening to P-Flag New Orleans, expanding the rainbow on WHIV LP in New Orleans, 102.3 FM. WHIV is radio programming dedicated to human rights and social justice. Stream us live online at WHIVFM.org in all wars. Tyra?
You can continue to support WHIV-FM by visiting our website and making a one-time or recurring donation. While you're there, click on Store and treat yourself to one of our stylish polo shirts, my personal favorite, the coffee mug, or any other gift item. Simply go to WHIVFM.org and click Store. That's WHIVFM.org. Thank you. We're not a radio station with a mission. We're a mission with a radio station. End all wars.
All right. Thank you, Tyra.
Yeah,
Well, we have fun with segues on our show. It just came along one day. I got tired of just interrupting people to read something, but it's an FCC regulation, so we have to do it. And so I try to make it fun, And Tyra and when Josh is here, they both sit there waiting for how am I going to lead into the next one, So we try to never be boring. Even with stuff that's repetitive.
I love that. I try never be boring.
Yeah. And, when you're doing stuff, when you're working, like before I retired, you're working for a living and you're basically doing repetitious stuff all the time. You got to find some way to break up that routine. I worked in retail sales and I knew so many people that did the same pitch just automatically. And I didn't like that because I don't like to repeat myself, largely because I can't remember what I said 5 minutes later. But seriously, though, I do get tired of doing things that are scripted. So I don't. And people always wondered, why were you so successful when you were working commission sales? And I said, because they didn't know I was trying to sell them something. I talk to them, I find out what they want, and I try to aim them to what would be best for them without ever saying, well, you realize that this is the best brand, you should go with this, and whichever one had the biggest commission on it. I didn't want to do that. I dealt with too many of those people, and I didn't want to have to do it. So, it's difficult in some professions to be more spontaneous, but it's not impossible.
Yeah.
I do think NASA looks the other way, and then it goes like, no. When you're trying to be spontaneous on a launch, it could be 10, could be 5. They really want more precise than that. But now, I am just curious about something with both of you, and I'll start with Ezra, and after they tell us what they were thinking, I'm going to go to Tyra. What was it that made you decide to go into to study to be a mortician or a funeral director? What?
Oh, goodness. Yeah, that's the $1 million question, right? I tell people all the time that I should have an elevator pitch for this, down. I should have a tight 3-minute explanation, but I really don't. I was initially interested in funeral service because I did a lot of theater and costume design when I was younger, and I saw I'm a professional face painter on the side. I still am. That's my side hustle in today's hustle culture. Yeah. But I was doing a lot of special effects makeup and theatrics and stuff. And I kind of saw embalming initially as the next step in special effects. You are rebuilding somebody and you're truly helping somebody with this skill, right? If somebody's experienced trauma and their family wants to view them, you are, making it better using this skill that you have. And so that was my initial interest in it. And then I got really interested in the green burial movement. And from there, I went to school for apparel design and costuming, and I worked actually in theater for about 10 years doing costuming. And then I kind of honestly wanted a steady paycheck. It's just really hard to live like gig to gig and season to season. And I was like, well, I'm really passionate about green burial. I'm super interested in the culture surrounding death and dying. And I also I think I would excel at this skill because I already have, this background. And so I decided to pursue funeral school. And I had talked about it a lot, even as I was graduating college in design. And the funniest thing is my dad, being a Southern dad, was like, you're just being morbid. Like, you're just saying this because you're goth. And he told me that I couldn't be an embalmer because I had never skinned a deer and I couldn't handle it, that I wouldn't have like the stomach for it. And I am now a licensed embalmer. And let me tell you, I still have never skinned a deer. I imagine the process is wildly different.
Yes, I would think so. That's a very poor analogy in my mind.
Yeah, he just, he was like, you're just doing this to bring the drama, right? But I tell people all the time, like, my job is not like sexy and dramatic. It's like the DMV for the deceased.
Yeah.
Like that scene in Beetlejuice with the waiting room, like that's me. Yeah. I'm the waiting room.
Yeah. And you call up a number, it's okay. Funeral number 47. Is 47?
It's a lot of paperwork.
Yeah.
It's a lot of paperwork.
How about 48? Just have the mourners lined up and ready.
Yeah. No, I mean, we definitely give our all to every single family.
Yeah.
But it is a lot of paperwork behind the scenes. I think people tend to sometimes think that the job is going to be like just the act of funeralizing somebody, like just the performance of it, Right. But the behind the scenes, I mean, we're filing stuff with the state, we're dealing with the coroner's office, we're doing all these detailed things, submitting stuff to the newspaper. And, we do all that stuff so that families can focus on grieving and honoring their loved one. But it is a wild amount of paperwork as a funeral director. It is mostly paperwork.
Well, my experience with funeral directors has been very good. Find out that the people that did my parents' funerals and my uncles and all these others, that every funeral I've ever been to for family members has been through the same funeral parlor, because they all bought their plots and everything at the same time and all. But they were friends of the family that ran it. And I assume from what I'd seen with the other people in the waiting rooms and all, talking to people arranging for funerals, that they treat everybody like they're friends of the family. And that's an amazing thing. And that's what so many people miss in a lot of jobs, is you need to relate to the person you're working with like they were a friend. No matter what you're doing, you really need to be able to relate to them and let them know that you actually care what happens. Instead of like, yeah, we got your money, we'll throw them in this hole over here, you're done. It's not that easy. There's a whole lot more. And like you said, a lot of paperwork. But now,
I would just to circle back to the guide for a second, talking about making everybody feel like they're a friend of the family. Yeah. That's definitely something that I've noticed in my career, with specifically my clients who are part of the LGBTQ plus community. Is I feel like when I get clients like that, they come in with a lot of fear, like they're waiting for, the funeral home to say the wrong thing or challenge their relationship with the person who passed. Mm-hmm. And I have pretty much every single time, as funeral directors, like, it's not about us. So we don't really make it a point to talk about our lives or mention our families or anything in small talk. Like, it's not really about us. People don't need to know that information. Yeah. But when I have families that I know are part of the LGBTQ community, I make a point to use the word wife. And I read as femme. And so, people see us as a lesbian couple. And these people just like the look of relief on their face when they realize that they're in the room with somebody who respects their identity and respects their relationship and is like a member of their community is wild. And it just really brought home the fact that like there needs to be more resources for this community, because people still go in with all of this fear and like just on edge, you know, because they don't think that there's somebody here who can relate to them and respects their experiences.
And let's face it, most of the time when the people come in is a very traumatic time in their lives, because most people wait until it's necessary instead of taking care of it earlier. So they're already traumatized because they've lost a family member, or they're losing one that's in hospice care or been diagnosed with a terminal cancer. That's when they suddenly go like, oh, we should do something about this. So we're trying to wake people up to that ahead of time. You know? Tyra, what was it that drew you to that particular field?
Well, I started out, I was working in hospice, and I personally feel that no one should leave this earth alone. No one should die alone. So if I knew someone was actively dying on my shift, I would sit in the room with them, talk with them as they were my family, pray if they want to pray, and I would sit there till they expire. And doing that for over a couple of years, I thought about taking it to the next step and, and going into mortuary science. And that's how I got interested in it.
Okay, now that brings us to something that a lot of people don't think of. Most people think of morticians, funeral directors, anybody in those fields as being, well, they just do it because they don't care about death. It doesn't bother them, or they're fascinated by death and they're morbid and all this other stuff. No, I have found for the most part, they're very compassionate people who want to make it easier for everybody concerned. It's too late to do anything besides honor the wishes of the person that has died, but you can be of great help to the people who are remaining by making their funeral what they wanted it to be. And everybody there knows that, like, well, that's how Fred would have wanted this, you know, and it gives them a little closure. And I found that I've known a lot of people involved in the funeral profession. I was good friends with the county coroner back in Fort Worth because his sons went to college and studied music, the same place I did. And I played a few church jobs for him. He was also the music director at a Catholic church. And I played a few things with him. And nothing more entertaining than having a meal at a coroner's house. The subject of conversation can be a little different, but hey, I'd played in bands long enough that you can just keep on eating. It's not a problem. But this guy was
my wife
what was that?
Oh, I was going to say that my wife is a baker, but for a minute there, she thought about getting into butchery, and I was like, we'll never be able to have anybody over for dinner because they're not going to trust us.
That's right. Do come by. Yeah, we had some interesting conversations and all, but the fellow was the county coroner for so long. When he retired, they renamed the street that leads to the Tarrant County morgue is now got his name on it. You know, so he was there for a long time. But we digress because our subject isn't about coroners. They play an important part in the role too, but also playing an important part in the role of your hearing about this particular service is due to the fact that we have WHIV LP in New Orleans, 102.3 FM. WHIV is radio programming dedicated to human rights and social justice. Stream us live online at WHIVFM.org. End all wars. One of our slogans, aside from the one that Tyra gave you about the radio station with with a mission being the mission that has a radio station. One of our other slogans is WHIV stands for We Honor Independent Voices, and we do. So when we're talking to people on this show, we're talking to people that have something to offer to our community and beyond. I mean, you don't have a funeral home that's like, "Hi, this is the LGBTQ funeral home." It's for everybody. You don't exclude LGBTQ. And that's the difference between having all of this stuff prepared and not having it prepared, is you find out that you're going to a place where they don't want you. That's not a good place to live. It's not a good place to spend the afterlife in a place that nobody wanted you. Go to a place where people are not only accepting, but understanding. Because that's the key. You can be welcoming, accepting, and tolerant, which I hate is the tolerant, because it's like, well, we can put up with you. I don't care if you are an axe murderer, because that's the kind of thing that comes to mind when you say tolerant. But we're talking about people who are actually accepting and understanding, and they understand that your wishes are important even after you're gone. You want to be remembered. I have a lot of friends that remember me from before, because I didn't transition until I was 57. That was when I started my transition. And a lot of people that remember the person before. And I'm fine with that. They seem to think that person was a good person. And so they stayed on as friends afterwards, because they decided I was still the same person, which is what most people don't get. You don't just suddenly change like, oh, I've decided that I'm going to change my name, so I will change my entire personality and every one of my beliefs overnight, because that's who I am now. No, we stayed the same person. That core person was there before. If you were a good, caring person, you're not going to turn into a jerk overnight. You're going to be the same person you were before, but happier with yourself, which makes it so much easier to be a caring person when you're at peace.
Yeah, definitely.
So remember that when you're trying to override their final wishes, let them have peace permanently.
Yes.
Okay. Now, Ezra, would you like to tell everybody how they can get a copy of this guide you have?
Yeah, so the guide was published through WHIV, which is our nonprofit. So it's available for free digital download, and there's a printable version on wake.education is the website. So wake.education. And then you click on the tab that says resources, and the first thing that comes up is the guide. And there's two versions. You can save it on your phone. You can open up the PDF and search for the one single thing you need if you just have one specific question. And then we're also available via email if anybody's got questions or looking for extra resources or needing to be pointed in the right direction. You can always reach out to us at Wake. And we also have, with the guide, some links to other helpful websites, the different law firms and hospice groups and other resources. And then also there, we have the downloadable template for a living will, and also the template to assign your primary right of disposition to somebody. So that's the big step that we talk about a lot in the guide, is giving your right of disposition. So the right to do your final, whatever you want to happen to your body, to carry that out, to somebody that you trust, that, you think is going to outlive you, and that you hopefully have prepared with the adequate information and funding to carry out your wishes. But to be able to give somebody that right that is gonna honor you the way you want it to be honored.
Yeah.
All right.
And then we don't have anything coming up just yet, but if you pay attention to our social media accounts, and if you sign up for our mailing list, we do hold clinics where you can take those documents and get them notarized for free as well if you're at a point in your life where you're wanting to get some of this like set in stone and accomplished.
Now, at this point, we should mention that this was a collaborative effort. It wasn't just like, oh, I work in the funeral industry, so I'll put together this guide. You started working with that. But Wake also has had contributors to this from the legal profession.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's covered from all different angles of what you need to know. It's a very good guide. I was introduced to it at the Sage Coffee Talking Week. That was Liz came to ours and presented it, and it was amazing to me that there is a nice, concise guide that you can get, because so much of this is done like at the last minute, where people go like, "Oh, my uncle just died. What do I do now?" And that's a terrible time to find out what all you need to do, because there's a lot to be done. So I would advise everybody to look into this a little bit, because this is one thing that we all have in common. George Burns once said that he wasn't ever going to die because it'd been done before. He wanted to find a different way to exit. But there isn't another way out. This is how something that everybody shares, the entire LGBTQ plus community and the larger community all around the world, is that life as it is right now is finite. It comes to an ending point. And the sooner we realize that that's just a truth and you can't change it, we should prepare for it, instead of leaving it up to everybody else going like, "Oh, I don't want to mess with that. I'll let somebody else do it." No. Take care of something that make it a little easier for the people that are left behind, because they'll have enough to deal with. Okay.
Definitely. And yeah, I just to take a second to shout out, the people who helped us. We did collaborate with several hospice professionals. We talked to Jamie Boudreau with the Louisiana and Mississippi Hospice and Palliative Care Organization. Nicholas Haidt of the Haidt Law Group had a huge, influence in what was in here. The Pro Bono Law Project helped us out. Dietz, they are a consultant. They helped open the gender clinic at Crescent Care, and they're part of Tidal. And they had a huge hand in this as well. So many different members of the community came together to give their best professional advice for this. So this is definitely a very vetted resource that has had a lot of hands in it to make sure that the information is useful and correct, and definitely going to point you in the right direction to get done what you need to get done, for sure.
No, I don't want to give everybody the idea that everybody in the community knows everybody else in the community. But when you were going through that list, there were two names that hit me of people I've talked to basically through this show. For one of them, that was Nicholas Haidt. We know of him. He's a very friendly lawyer you can go to if you've got issues with your family or anything else, and you've got something you need to straighten out. He understands the community and is very helpful. So we know him. I think he was on the show in the first couple of years we had, but he's one of the good guys. There are others that we talked to, but you mentioned Dietz. Mm-hmm. I haven't seen Dietz in a while, but Dietz is an amazing person.
I love Dietz. I want Dietz to be my best friend so bad.
Yeah. Dietz was one of the first non-binaries that I ever met, did explain to me a little better for me to understand how it was that made them happy, rather than having a place where, we grew up with the binary. You're either in this box or this box, and transgender meant you moved to the other box. You didn't have anywhere else to go. And then they opened up the whole idea of gender fluidity and non-binary and all these other areas in between, and you realize, we talk about spectrums on everything else. Why don't we see the spectrum here? And Dietz was one of the better ones at explaining it, just like, that's how they felt comfortable. And it's like, I'm glad you found that, and they're just an amazing person and worked so hard at Crescent Care getting that going. Sorry I don't get to see them as much as I used to. But it was very.
I know. I loved working with Dietz.
Yeah, and she has a little bit of energy too. They have a little bit of energy. I have problems with pronouns because I don't think about pronouns. I use more names than pronouns so I don't get into trouble. But I'm not one of these that says you can't use they and them if it's a single person there because it's not proper in the English language. Shakespeare did it. We all thought he was great. Why can't we go along with that? I just mess up because I'm forgetful. But
that's okay.
I tried my best but people can tell the difference. I always say this, they can tell the difference if you're misgendering somebody on purpose, if you slipped up, or if you use a gender specific for a non-binary. They can tell whether you're doing it on purpose to needle them or if you just slipped. And I let it go if they slipped because they didn't mean to do it. So I don't want to stop the conversation and go, hey, wait a minute, get that right. Because usually they correct themselves when they suddenly realize, oops, I did that wrong. Mm-hmm. So I like to be a little forgiving too. But
I don't even really notice it because I being in funeral services, it's a very conservative field. And I'm not, that's not the hill I'm going to die on just yet, trying to get grieving families to, use my pronouns or anything. So people use she, her pronouns for me at work. And I don't, somebody just lost their loved one. They don't care what my gender identity is at the end of the day.
They're not looking for a lecture at this point.
Yeah, absolutely not. I don't even bother with it at work. I mean, I would love to, eventually get to a place in my career or maybe like if we opened our own funeral home and be more quote unquote out at work. But for where I'm at now, it's about the families. They don't need to worry about what I get up to when I'm not working for them.
All right. Well, we want to thank you so much for being with us today, Ezra.
Yes.
And thank you for all the information. And now we have to remind everybody that PFLAG New Orleans has monthly support meetings, and they're on the second Thursday of each month. Right now, they're still going virtual. We're waiting for a place that says it's okay. So we're doing them over Zoom. And you want to find out more about that, you can call PFLAG New Orleans at 504-862-5912. Or you can visit us online at pflagno, pflagno.org. Or on Facebook, go to PFLAG New Orleans for reminders about the meeting times and places, as well as information about other events. And I want to thank you for listening. Please tune in again next Thursday at 9 a.m. I'm Sally Michelle Jackson.
And I'm Tyra the Purple Butterfly.
And hopefully Josh, a.k.a. Adonis, will be able to finish the move at some point in the near future and be back with us. And if he were here, he would remind everybody that until next time, laissez bon temps rouler, let the good times roll. You've been listening to PFLAG New Orleans, Expanding the Rainbow on WHIV LP in New Orleans, 102.3 FM. WHIV is radio programming dedicated to human rights and social justice. Stream us live online at WHIVFM.org. End all wars.